I want to welcome everybody to the Oklahoma City Golf and Country Club today. I appreciate you finding this location. We're out here just once a month. And nice to see the crowd. Welcome to our Facebook audience. Always great to have you here, and we do hear from you from time to time, and it's great to have you as part of our audience. Paul Kelly's going to lead the pledge, but first, and by the way, we don't have a national anthem today because something happened to our audio. So Paul's going to lead the pledge. But first, we're going to have Paul Gable open us in a word of prayer. Paul?
Thank you, Bob. Would you please pray with me? Lord, we want to stop and thank you for your many blessings upon us and upon our nation, and we thank you for this time. At the same time, Lord, we come before you with burdens on our heart for our city, for our state, for our nation, and we lay those at your feet. Thank you for your presence here, and we do pray your hand of blessing upon our speakers. Would you give us all ears to hear and eyes to see and discernment to understand the times? We are grateful for all you've done for us, and we pray this all in the great name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Attention colors. In salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. As you all know, back in 2019, I think it was Joe Beth Harmon's race for the Oklahoma City Chamber. This is a noisy room. It's probably because we don't have carpet. So I'm going to wait until we get seated here. So back in 2019, I think it was, we learned that Bernie Sanders was funding local political races for school boards, city councils, and so OCPAC has become very much more aware that that is something we need to give our attention to. So Brian Armstrong, I think you're going to talk about city races or something? Well, he's going to talk about something else. I've covered that now. Something new from Brian Armstrong. Welcome, Brian Armstrong.
Sure, I can talk about city races, but we'll be here till 3. Will we go with that? OCPAC is going to be back with you. I promise you I haven't been ignoring y'all. We've just been really slammed. How many of y'all are noticing now that mask mandates, not just here but across the country, have expired? Still got businesses out there who are forcing you to wear masks. Airlines are going to force you to show proof of vaccination. There's a reason for this. There's an organization called the Civic Alliance. That is an organization of over 1,200 major businesses, and I mean every major business in the United States, encompassing over 5.5 million employees, all who have dedicated themselves to advancing a leftist, Marxist agenda. You can't get away from it. They're too big to boycott. They're literally in every phase of American life. They're in your phones. They're in your computers. Boycotts are useless. Andrew Torba, founder of GAB, was right. It's time we form a conservative Christian economy, period. I'm happy to announce United Liberty is doing just exactly that. Last week, we launched the Liberty Business Network, Oklahoma's first and only business platform for conservatives by conservatives, committed to connecting conservative consumers who don't want to be harassed about a mask or a vaccine with businesses who won't do it. Right now, it was a soft launch last week. We've already had a number of businesses reach out to us wanting to get signed up and get involved. Right now, we're looking for start, 100 businesses who will commit to signing up for a year to become founding members of the Liberty Business Network. Now, normal rate is $50 per month, and that's all inclusive. There's no additional fees to advertise to our network, nothing. For the founding members, we're going to knock 2 months off of an annual subscription, so it's only $500 for the whole year, and that covers everything. those businesses will then be recognized on our website as founding members of the Liberty Business Network. They'll get window decals and an icon for their website identifying themselves as founding members, and they'll also be featured very, very prominently on the Liberty Business Network site. After all, I'd rather have pictures of conservative businesses than a bunch of stock photos out there to make them look nice. The website, it's pretty simple. It's libertybusinessnetwork.com. If you are a business owner and want to talk to me afterwards, I'll be here. The email address to contact our sales staff is on the website. It's sales@libertybusinessnetwork.com. This is not just about convenience anymore. It's about our very survival. Yes. We have businesses in Edmond who are saying you can't come in without proof of a vaccine. It's going to be here too. So we invite you to join us if you're consumers. We keep an eye on the website. We will have a sign up list for an email database for that. We're also in the process of developing and launching an app, hopefully by the end of the summer, so all of those businesses can advertise to their conservative customers right on their phone and in their pocket. And you don't have to give your money to Groupon or Facebook who all support Marxist ideologies. We don't. So it's time now to unite, to join up, to start a conservative economy. Thank you very much. And this is how we do it. Thank you all.
Based on what Brad just said there, I did an article 2 issues back in the Oklahoma Constitution called "Now is the Time for the Great Christian Reset," and I listed 10 things that we as Christians need to do right now. And maybe I can get Bob to put that in the email at some point in time. But anyway, there are some things we need to do, and you have to understand, and that's why this book, The History of Socialism from Plato to the Present, is so important. Because the goal of, I don't care whether you call them socialists, communists, fascists, dictators, evil people of any kind, every time they gain control, there's 2 things that they've got to do. They know that the ruled class is no threat to them. So they only want 2 classes, the ruling class and the ruled class. But the middle class is a threat to them. And that's what Brian is talking about here. Middle class businesses. Now, let me just say this, Brian. I think you're half wrong on the boycott, okay? There's 2 words we need to use. Boycott and boycott. Yes. B-U-Y-cott. Yes. So when you buy from Christian small businesses, you are boycotting the bad guys. So it's a combination of the 2. Now, Bob, I'm going to start my 10-minute clock here. All right. Folks, last week we put these on all of the tables and things like this. This is the flyer for upcoming event with Alan, I was going to say Keys, Alan West, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. We actually had Alan Keys at OCPAC, believe it or not, years and years ago. But anyway, the tickets start at $150. It's a fundraiser. It's not intended to just break even. It is a fundraiser because, just as Bob was starting to say, once we realized when Trevor Loudon was here that the strategy of the Marxists, it's the same here in Oklahoma as it is everywhere else, and that's to put their people in as many lower offices as possible. They can do enormous damage in your school boards, the city councils, your mayors, particularly the George Soros-backed district attorneys and attorney general and such as that. So as an organization, OCPAC realizes we can never again ignore these lower races. So we have need of collecting a massive amount of data and associations that people have, so that we can identify all these Marxists, whether they're running for office or in office, and root them out. Yes. And to do that, we're in process of forming a 501c3. It will be a completely separate organization from OCPAC. You can't mix a political organization with a 501c3. But they will do the kind of research and have the type of data available that we can access as a political organization, as well as others can access this to go after these socialists. So that's the purpose. I'll be over here at the table afterwards. I have tickets. You can sponsor an entire table, or you can buy individual tickets. So if you will see me after the meeting, we'll try to get this done. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, Daly Stupak, did I get that right? Is going to talk about grassroots.
Okay, so I am currently serving right now as your vice chairman for the Oklahoma County Republican Party. And part of the reason I chose to do that is because the grassroots are a little bit upset with what's going on. And one of the first things that we've set as a goal is grassroots training. So we haven't had precinct leadership training. I've been here since 2001. I don't ever remember even getting any information about how to be a precinct leader. We are having training on Saturday, June 12th from 9 to noon is what time we've set it for. I think it's going to be very interactive, very interesting. We've got a variety of speakers that are going to present the nuts and bolts, if you will, for how to build your precinct. It is the individuals who live in our neighborhoods who are going to be making the difference in selecting who's running for office and really helping them be informed when they go to the ballot box. So our platform committee is part of this. Part of the reason we're having a platform committee right now is not to crush our current elected officials, but it's to work with our elected officials who are conservative, who love this nation, and who want to have us behind them. We need to work in unity, just the way the leftists are. So we're going to build this party from the ground up, and it is being recorded. This is going to go statewide. I am so excited. Yes. So we're going to take this as far as we can. Thank you.
All right, before we hear from AJ Ferate about our rights and before they take us to jail, I guess, I don't know what, lawyer safety. We have Brian Hill, and Brian Hill is in a long line of Pentecostal preachers. I actually didn't know that a week ago. And so I feel like they're taking us over. You know, our new chairman of the Republican Party is a Pentecostal preacher, and he sure does show up when he speaks. So we're excited about John Bennett. But Brian Hill has done a favor for the church. As a matter of fact, if you read the newsletter, I think I said something like he fought for the church and he won. And he passed a bill that says, no, you can't tell God's people that they can't gather because they might get sick.
Yeah. Yes.
So if you would welcome the author of that bill, Brian Hill.
Well, hi, folks. I will remind myself, as a fourth generation minister of the gospel, that I'm not up here to preach today. So I will not do that. Although you put me in front of a microphone, and pretty happy to go there, right? Just kind of happens. First of all, Pastor Kern, who I had the honor to work with very closely when I directed Youth for Christ for many years off of the 10th Street area, working with gang kids down in the 10th Street area. It's always an honor to see you, sir, and wanted to express my gratitude for our partnership for many years with all of that. I mean, just truly a mentor. Great. Okay, so now that I got that out of the way, and also to his wonderful bride, who before I ever ran for office, I sat in her office when she was still in the legislature and talked to her about the worthy cause. I don't have my wife here with me, so today, County Commissioner Mark, I'm going to watch you, all right? I think I'm doing 10 minutes, and I've got to get back to the Capitol also, so I'd like about a minute if you could let me know, okay? This is a big deal to me. Here's why, is that as a kid from Tennessee, born and raised there, came out here in '95 to go to Southwestern Christian University and to go on to do entrepreneurial work, and we opened several companies off of 10th Street. During that time, we were working with Youth for Christ working with gang kids. And I remember when I first felt the call to run for office. And I remember first telling God, no, thank you. I can help a kid off 10th Street. We can work with some gang kids and share who Jesus is, and I'll be okay by that. And I remember someone once saying to me, you can't change it from outside. And if someone had told me 4 years ago when I was knocking doors that there would come a day I would stand on the floor of the House of Representatives in the great state of Oklahoma and have to fight on behalf of churches to be open on a Sunday morning, I would have thought you lost your mind.
That's right.
And yet last, it would have been October of 2019, I remember after being in office for 2 years, looking at my bride and asking her, are we gonna do this again? Are we willing to put our name back on the ballot? Is there still something to do? I'm a proponent, a fighter for foster care, former foster parent from some of the kids we worked with off 10th Street. And so I'm very passionate about it. We got some good work done for them to make sure that we're not just making sure that we take care of them and the families that take care of them. Now I remember looking at my wife in that October before we all had heard of this thing called COVID. And asking her, is there still space for us to make a difference? And I tell you all that today because when we decided that, we didn't know what the difference ahead of us was. At that moment, we had no idea the challenge that stood before us, not only as a state, but as a people of faith. We had no clue about what we were about to face, but there was a worthy cause. We just didn't know what it was yet. Had no idea that I'd need to run the Religious Freedom Act in the state of Oklahoma to protect your right and my right to peacefully assemble on a Sunday morning to worship our Father and our Creator. Had no idea that would come. But we realized the necessity in that April. We realized when municipals went to churches that were trying to have outside services and literally in a outside theater, and they were barred from having those services. We were told that just slightly north to us at churches that they could not meet on a Sunday morning without being cited for it. We were told in the great state of Oklahoma that churches were not essential. Liquor stores were, golf courses were, but church wasn't essential. I don't know, everyone in the room may not be a church-going, Jesus-loving person, and more, that's great. But for me, it is as the air I breathe, it is as the food I eat, it is as essential as every other aspect of my life. And that is why it is crucial that we have those two bills. I had the privilege working with not only Leader Eccles and with Senator Bullard, but also with Jay Sekulo's group. We had the privilege of working with them to make sure we got the language right. We did it in two separate bills, which would be HB 2648 and also SB 368. For those writing it down, it's HB 2648 and SB 368. Those we operated as partnering bills. What 368, the SB did, was say that churches are essential. It codified it, put it in statute, just so in case anyone was confused in the future, churches are essential. What HB 2648, we went a little further and said essential, non-essential, whatever you want to call it, based on the rights of the First Amendment, the Oklahoma Constitution, and the rights given to us by our Almighty Creator, we have the right to gather, to worship, to speak peacefully about our Savior. And so that's what those two bills partnered together to do. And I'm very pleased that Governor Stitt, he signed those into law about 3 weeks ago. Yes. So what I stand before you today is to tell you that the cause is worthy. Amen. Local advocacy, grassroots, speaking out is worthy. It's a worthy cause, and we cannot now lay back on our good laurels. But we have to fight harder today than we ever have. We have to stand stronger today than we ever have. And things like the First Amendment, like the Second Amendment, things that are core to who we are as a people, pushing back. I mean, I literally heard a gentleman, not of our party, stand on the House floor yesterday and say that the redistribution of wealth is a good thing in the Oklahoma House of Representatives. The battle is not over. And so I hope you hear it from my heart. And there's a few of us, in fact, I'd say several of us, that are willing to stand in the gap. And we're truly grateful for your support. We're grateful for a community of faith. We're grateful for conservatives that still believe in simple things like, capitalism. I speak for that. Where am I at, Mark?
You're about 6 minutes or so.
Okay, well, I'll take 2, and then I'll get on out of the way, all right? Give the speaker more time. It is no small thing as a poor kid from Tennessee, and I tell this, I get to speak to a lot of college students these days and high school students, and I was made director of the PAGE program for the House, which to me is one of the most vital roles because each week we have 12 to 20 young people from across the great state of Oklahoma. We get to talk to them about conservative values. We get to tell them about why they get to go to school and why they have roads to drive on. And why all of these privileges that they have in their life is because someone decided to be a capitalist and get up and go to work and work their tail off in order to provide it. And so it's pretty important to me. I come as a poor kid. My dad would sit up at night with a pitchfork, killing the field rats to keep them from eating my fingers off, and I do have all 10 still, thanks to Dad. And that's the kind of poverty I came from. And my parents were hardworking. Dad was blue collar. Grew up working on a lumber yard with Dad. Mom got an entrepreneurial bug about when I was 12. Opened a daycare out of our living room. Started working. Started keeping more kids. Decided that she'd build onto the back of her house and built it up into a full preschool. Went on to buy another one. And here we are 30 years later and about 15 companies more. And it's because Mama fought. And Mama taught her son that if you got grit in your gut and a fire in your soul and believe in your Creator, you can do anything that's before you. And so the American dream is still alive. As long as you and I still believe in it, and we teach the next generation the same thing, that it is worth fighting for. As long as we do it, our America will stand, our beloved Oklahoma will stand, and from the depth of all that I am, God bless you, thank you, and I appreciate your time today.
So inspiring. We need more men of God to help us govern ourselves. By the way, Steve Kern made the announcement, and there were some questions out here. It is this coming Saturday, 3 days from now, 6 o'clock, not a.m., but p.m., on the steps of the Capitol. Sunset, 3 days from now. So, when you read your Bibles from start to finish, Genesis, well, not Genesis, but the first appearance of the Hebrew word kahal is in Leviticus, and it's translated assembly. And when the Greek scholars translated the Old Testament into Greek, they translated that word you might be familiar with, ecclesia. So all the way through the Old Testament, it talks about the ecclesia. And then we read about it in the New Testament. But there is no Western civilization, there is no civilization without the assembly of God's people. And so Brian Hill, we're just really, really grateful for all the work you've done, and thank you for that. Our next speaker is one of those rare lawyers. This is an issue we need to deal with. Why in the world do we have law schools that don't understand what law is, what epistemological foundations of truth are? Why do we have that? I don't get it. But all of our law schools graduate people who are insane.
Yes.
So this is a man from Liberty University. I was at Liberty University this spring. He was begging me to buy him a bunch of t-shirts. So yes, that is different. There are different law schools, but this is something we need to understand, and we need to understand this doesn't have to be this way. It has to change. And just because it's been that way for 100 years or more, doesn't mean we're going to accept it. And it has to change, and there is a new vision. So A.J. Ferate has been doing legal work for the Republican Party, the GOP in Oklahoma, for some time. And he leads the local, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's a group of sane lawyers who thinks that words mean what the dictionary says they mean. Although, as I say that, dictionaries are getting a little bit weird in their definitions today. It's frightening. But we appreciate AJ, we appreciate him being here. He was at our meeting last week, and his office is not far from where we normally meet. And since we had him this week, we wanted to make sure we moved the meeting, so he had to actually drive to the meeting. But AJ, are you here? Yeah, come on up. If you would, welcome wonderful Oklahoma attorney, AJ Ferate.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and see all of you. I see a lot of friendly faces that I've known over the years and worked with. And so I'm glad to be here with you today. Before I start, I just want to relate to what the good representative talked about with his bill on religious liberty. I want you to think back to Easter of last year when we were all told to stay home and don't think about even sniffing the air outside of your home on Easter morning. I was actually part of a group that was helping a Kentucky church. That Kentucky church said, well, okay, if we can't have everybody inside, we're gonna have church at a parking lot. Everybody stay in your car, everybody stay separate. You in your car, we're gonna have church. The city of Louisville, Kentucky said no. And said, we're going to arrest anybody that actually shows up in the parking lot. Well, we found that out on a Thursday. On a Friday, we filed a lawsuit in federal court. And the newly appointed, frankly, federal judge at the time, took a look at that and wrote one of the longest, most wonderful religious liberty-related opinions that I've seen in a long, long time. And so that church got to have its parking lot Easter Sunday service as a result of that. So, that's just one of those things that I hope we don't have to live through again, but fortunately in some instances we have opinions now that help that. I'll talk a little bit more if some of you at the end have questions about the COVID-related things, religious liberty in particular, because I think we have seen a significant shift in the courts, not a perfect shift. But a meaningful shift in the way that the courts look at, in particular, religious liberty in this time of COVID. So, so we can. I encourage you to ask about that a little bit later if you wish. I am AJ Ferate. I'm an attorney here in Oklahoma City. I'm based here in Oklahoma City. I am not from Oklahoma, but I chose to live here and continue to choose to live here. A woman asked me beforehand, why in the world would you come to Oklahoma? Well, I went to law school at Oklahoma City University, and she said, well, why would you do that? I'm getting you in trouble back there. And I just held up my ring. There was a girl in Kansas I kind of liked, and you know, we've been married now for 16 years. She came here. I made her go to DC with me for a few years, and she said, no, we're going back to Oklahoma. And she's not even from here either, so. So I guess this is where we be for the rest of our lives. So today I wanted to come and I've talked with your leadership here because I think that there's kind of a gap a little bit when we start talking about government and government issues. And that gap really relates to, you know, we're all looking at what the governor's doing, right? the governor going to sign the bill? Is the president going to have that executive order? We all look at the legislature. You know, there's this bill filing through committee. Is that going to get out of committee? Is this something we're going to see? Is this something we need to rally about? But the one thing we don't ever do as people, not just as conservatives, but as people, is we don't focus on the courts. We don't think about the courts. We don't think about the makeup of the courts. We don't think about the structure of the courts. There's some of us within the Federalist Society that focus on such issues. I'll talk a little more about the Federalist Society a little bit later. But for the most part, we are not following that. And it is a little bit more difficult. We'll chat about that a little bit. But I wanted to come today to really talk about why it's important to make sure we're thinking about what is happening in the courts. The courts are not necessarily set up, constitutionally speaking, to be a political entity. But unfortunately, as a result of the way that we do appointments, it can be considered to be so now. You know, we can look at the appointment or the nominees that were just put out by President Biden just last week on the federal bench, and there is he didn't go for any particular political philosophy or anything like that. He looked for a diversity of people. The thing he won't say is that a diversity of people who think like him. So that's kind of my intro to it. Are you running the slideshow? Okay, perfect. I didn't get to ask that at the beginning. So a little bit about me. I just kind of wanted to, many of you do know me, some of you do not, and so I just thought I'd kind of go through a quick bio on myself. Went to the University of Nebraska. Go Big Red. Galen, of course Galen is from Nebraska. I knew that. Spent 4 years at the University of Nebraska. They were fourth grade years, by the way. We won 3 national titles in the 4 years that I went to college there. So
That's when we had a football team.
that's when we had a football team.
Talk about when you played Texas.
Yeah, that was it. I'll reserve the refs put the second back on the clock. Let's just be clear about that. Then I went to work for the Nebraska Republican Party for 4 years, did the political affairs for the party, and then spent 1 year each with the Ohio, Washington State, and Oklahoma Republican parties as well. That doesn't include the 12 years I spent as general counsel of the party, focused on really the election law issues, focused on what the State Ethics Commission does, which, boy, if you need a long lecture sometime, have me come talk about the State Ethics Commission. Or what they try to do. We fortunately have to push back. But also on FEC, on the Federal Election Commission. So those are areas that I've specialized in for Republican efforts for years. I've been staff on numerous local, state, federal, and national campaigns. Those national campaigns, just a very brief story. The coolest thing I ever did was when Pat Buchanan's sister called me, and she said, hey, I'm 22 years old. And she says, hey, I'm going to be over in Iowa this weekend. Do you want to drive over and look for office space with me for my brother? I got to drive around downtown Des Moines with Patty Buchanan. She has her name on a dollar bill, for goodness sake. How much good can I get? After law school here in Oklahoma, I was a clerk for Judge Lumpkin on the Court of Criminal Appeals. I consider Judge Lumpkin personally to be the closest thing to Justice Scalia that we have here in the state of Oklahoma. I just wish that we had him over on the Oklahoma Supreme Court rather than the Court of Criminal Appeals. He does great work there, so don't get me wrong, he's very essential. But wonderful, wonderful man, and I had wonderful privilege to work with him. In my work at Spencer Fane, I work on constitutional law issues, work on an appellate practice, which generally means that while I will get involved in district court cases, I usually argue them and am more involved in a briefing at the appellate levels. I work on oil and gas issues, I work on tribal issues, and have dabbled a little bit in education law. I hold state and national board positions within the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is a nonprofit organization that is really a debate society. It's set up by conservatives, admittedly. There's a lot of libertarians and conservatives in there. We have good debates even within the group, but we certainly reach out to groups like ACLU as well to get involved and have an interesting dialogue and discussion about the issues that really center around the law. We have meetings sporadically. We don't have particular set meetings in Oklahoma City, but we have 3 set up here at OCPA coming up over the next couple of months. And certainly look for our Facebook page and where we put the information out on our meetings. And the last thing that I admittedly brag about, there's not many people that have been educated in separation of powers by Justice Scalia before he died. I had the opportunity on more than one occasion to sit and listen to him lecture for days on end about the separation of powers. And so that's something I like to highlight. Just a few of the cases that I've worked on, a few of the issues that I've worked on. First one that I have up there, Kennedy versus Bremer School District. You've probably heard about this in the news, and candidly, it's probably the one I'm most proud of. So I went to school in Bremerton, Washington, just near Seattle. It's a blue-collar Navy town, and Coach Kennedy was the football coach there at Bremerton. I say was because for 8 years, he would kneel at the middle of the field and say a brief 15-second prayer. And that was until actually somebody from another school district, complimented the Bremerton administration on the fact that he was able to do this. After that notice, he was let go and suspended from his job for praying at midfield. Fox News has covered the case heavily. We've been up to the Supreme Court. We had an amazing, unique opinion at the Supreme Court, but it was sent back down. We're at the Ninth Circuit currently, and it's more than likely that we will probably go back to the Supreme Court with it. I've always had a passion for my school and the policy issues that are going on, but my school is wrong on this one, and I'm very proud to stand with Coach Kennedy on that case. I have Carpenter v. Murphy up there. Many of you may know that as McGirt. It's the same issues. It's a very important issue for our state. Whether you are a supporter of the tribes or whether you're a supporter of the state of Oklahoma and Governor Stitt's position on this issue, this is a very unique, special thing to Oklahoma. The case certainly affects people in other states as well, but there's a lot of issues that are that are going to be dealt with over the next several decades unless some fix is done in Congress to help us figure out how to address the issues that we're dealing with in that case. And essentially what happened, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, a prisoner said that the state of Oklahoma did not have the jurisdiction to prosecute him and put him in prison because he was a tribal member and the crime occurred on tribal land. Supreme Court, the Court of Criminal Appeals looked at it and said, no, you're in the right spot. The 10th Circuit looked at it and said, no, I'm not so sure. And the Supreme Court said, yep, that's right. The reservations still exist among the 5 civilized nations. And so all of those cases that have been prosecuted over the last many years need to be relitigated in federal court to keep those criminals in jail. Southwind Women's Center versus Stitt. When this whole thing started with COVID and the governor had regulations placed on surgical procedures, voluntary surgical procedures, he included abortion in that there was a restriction on abortion during the COVID period. And so I represented 15 attorneys general from around the country in that case that said, no, the governor of the state of Oklahoma is absolutely right. And one of the abortion clinics came in and said, no, that's wrong. And unfortunately, one of our judges downtown actually agreed with the abortion clinics. And so we did lose on that. I still do feel very strongly that we had the right position there, but the courts disagreed. So, and the 10th Circuit viewed it the same way as the district court judge. So, Institute for Responsible Alcohol Policy versus State, that was an interesting one that really went to, so we've reformed our state alcohol laws. We have a set of laws here now in the Constitution around alcohol. But we also have had an issue last session, 2 sessions ago, where they tried to pass a state statute that conflicted with the Constitution and with the new alcohol laws. And the question was, who's right, the Constitution or the statute? Can the statute override the Constitution? The answer the Supreme Court came back with was no. The Constitution obviously is, and so that's one where the state Supreme Court got it right. They didn't get it right without being wrong on a lot of things in there, admittedly, but they did get it right. Paycom payroll versus OCPA, that's an ongoing case. I don't know if you follow OCPA stuff, but they're being sued for defamation by Paycom. We've been representing them, and we've been very successful in pushing back against Paycom and their push to, OCPA would say, cancel their free speech rights. This last case we'll talk about in a little bit, but Vulcan Construction Materials versus City of Tishmingo. This is one of those cases that I think is important to talk about and have awareness about, because it really does go down to the fact that little minute cases like Vulcan Construction Materials can have a great impact on how we are involved in liberty and the restrictions that can be placed on us by the risk of a simple lawsuit. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. You know, like I said earlier on, it's easy to follow what the president is doing. We see that on the news every single day. It's easy to focus on what the governor and the legislature are doing. It's fairly easy to pay attention to what city government is doing. All you have to do is follow David Holt on Twitter, and he'll tell you what shoes he's wearing today. I don't know. I'm sure you're a nice enough guy. He did do that on Twitter, just yesterday or something. He bragged about his Thunder shoes.
And his groupies just fawned over.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But focusing on the courts does require more diligence. There can be more at stake in a court case than a bill in the legislature. Here's just an example of that last point. Let's talk about Klein for Oklahoma Coalition for Reproductive Justice. This was a case that kind of bannered around 2011. But the legislature and the governor properly signed, passed the bill through, approved a law criminalizing off-label uses of medications alternatively used for abortions. This really went down to RU 486 and banning that restriction on it. It had an on-label use. It could be prescribed for certain uses, but what the statute was saying is you can't use it for an off-label use. It has to actually have an FDA approval before you can use it in that sense. So in 2012, on that statute and a couple of others, the Oklahoma Supreme Court issued opinions, and one of the ways that we learn what the courts mean and how they are saying things is by the opinion they write, right? You don't want it to be overly wordy, you don't want it to be but you want to get an explanation of why. Why did you come to this conclusion? And they issued 3 opinions without analysis, just declaring that the laws were unconstitutional. The interesting part was they directly conflicted with other federal courts in the 10th Circuit. And one of them in particular, this Klein case, conflicted specifically with Planned Parenthood versus Casey and interpretations that have been taken as a result of So let me back up. I guess this is what I just realized I should have said. This same restriction that we had in Oklahoma had been in place in other states and been allowed to stand in other states under Planned Parenthood versus Casey. It's our Oklahoma Supreme Court that tried to use Casey to say, no, this doesn't stand. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court granted certiorari. That's the device by which the Supreme Court reviews decisions from lower courts, including the Oklahoma Supreme Court. But they certified a few questions back to the Oklahoma Supreme Court on this. And it was in preparation for the hearing, and pretty good indication, since the Supreme Court had already ruled on these things, they're granting cert here, pretty good indication that the Oklahoma Supreme Court was going to get overturned. They didn't get overturned because the Supreme Court certified the questions back down, and the Oklahoma Supreme Court said, oh, no, we didn't decide these cases under anything to do with federal law. They hid behind the Oklahoma Constitution rather than the U.S. Constitution, and so the U.S. Supreme Court could do nothing but just dismiss the case at that point, unfortunately. So that is one of the ways that our courts tries to circumvent and get around some of the things that candidly are constitutional, that our U.S. Supreme Court has said this is appropriate, but are not allowed, at least our court doesn't think so, under state constitutional law. Another case that our state's Supreme Court, I guess I'll just be blunt, screwed up, is the Douglas versus Cox Retirement Properties, and this was a 2013 case. Lawsuit was challenging part of tort reform. Everybody remembers the tort reform effort that was that happened about a decade ago. Big success, and it was finally going to put Oklahoma on par with other states around the country in how we process tort litigation in our state. The district court sided, in favor of the law, but the Oklahoma Supreme Court reversed the district court. They claimed what's called a single subject violation, and we'll talk about single subject on the next slide a little bit. I'll go into a little bit more detail, but for years, the Oklahoma Supreme Court has, whenever they don't like what the legislature has done, they go to one of their two favorite devices. They go to what is called a special law, or they use the single subject section of the Constitution. And they do those, and they never really justify how they get there. But the clearest way that we've had thus far is when Justice Gurich decided to explain to the legislature what a single subject violation is. And she explained it this way. Now tell me if this is clear. If you make a peanut butter cookie, it is apparent that it is smooth, one flavor cookie. It is still a peanut butter cookie even if you use crunchy peanut butter, because its major flavor is still peanuts. But when you add chocolate chips, pecans, coconut M&Ms, raisins, and dried cranberries, the additional discrete ingredients change the homogeneous nature of the peanut butter cookie into a jumble of different tastes and textures. It's still a cookie. It's just not a peanut butter cookie. Now, if you're a legislator, do you think that helps you in any way to figure out what a single subject violation is? I mean, even if I was to go with, even if I was to use the Gurich test, let's call it the Gurich test. I'm going to start doing that from now. If I was to use the Gurich test to help me figure out the single subject test in the state, I can still make it whatever the heck I want. But I would even argue she's wrong under her test, because there's still peanut butter as the main ingredient. Just because you add all this other junk in there, by the way, dried cranberries don't ever belong in a cookie, so if I'm going to be an attendee of one of your events and you have dried cranberries in your cookies, don't expect it to ever come back.
So was she a baker before this?
She was not. She was a district court judge. She is actually a registered Republican, but she was appointed by Governor Henry just before Governor Fallon came into office.
Is that the infrastructure bill?
Cookies are infrastructure, right? So I think that, candidly, I think even under the Gurich test, there's room to argue that she was wrong under that. So let's talk about the single subject test a little bit. I've already started to. So this is what the Constitution says about the single subject test. Every act of the legislature shall embrace but one subject. This is not an uncommon section in constitutions around the country, which shall be clearly expressed in its title, except general appropriation bills. So general appropriation bills, the budget can have multiple sections to it that are unrelated. General revenue bills, and bills adopting a code, digest, or revision of statutes. So if you were to, for example, create a new administrative law system, that body can under the Constitution, should be able to get through as appropriate, despite it not having a single subject. This and the next subject we'll talk about, the special law. These are, again, in constitutions around the country. By far, our Oklahoma Supreme Court has used this device as a weapon against the legislature rather than as an actual device that determines the true permissibility of whether or not the legislature did something right. We see this over and over. And so I've actually included here Justice Wyrick. He's now on the federal bench, so he's now Judge Wyrick. But at the time, Justice Wyrick got fed up with the abuse of the single subject test. And so this is what he wrote in dissent, and this is direct from an opinion. The court invokes Article 5, Section 57, single subject rule as a basis for invalidating all of Senate Bill 643. This shouldn't come as a surprise. Our increasingly permissive standing rules and amorphous single subject and special law jurisprudence have created a potent 1-2 punch that allows the court to judicially veto virtually any of the legislature's and people's laws, so long as someone files the proper papers in the clerk's office to initiate suit. This despite the fact that the single subject rule was never intended to be so exactingly enforced and in such technical manner as to cripple legislation. I gotta say that's from, if any of you are taking notes, that's from Hunsucker versus Fallon. I believe that case came out in 2018. I have written on that for the Federal Society in the past. Go read Justice Wyrick's dissent there. I mean, you think Charlie gets angry about stuff. Justice Wyrick in this dissent. I mean, I really encourage you to go do that. Again, I mentioned briefly special law, Article 5, Section 46. The legislature shall not, except as otherwise provided in this Constitution, pass any local or special law, and it goes on. This is something we have in the U.S. Constitution as well. This is something that other states have. And really the concept is that you can't pass a tax measure that says, we're gonna give American Airlines a tax break here of X amount. There are differences. I mean, if you go back to, what is it, McCullough versus Maryland, I think there's some special law debate in that one. But that's kind of the concept that it is you can't pass something specific to some person. So let's talk about 2016 Vasquez versus Dillard's. Legislature passed an opt-out act, and this is around the workers' comp reform that was done here in the state. And really, the simple thing that the statute did was it said, we have a workers' comp system in Oklahoma. You can use that if you choose. Or you can opt out of it and use a private workers' comp system. But it must have the same elements and requirements and everything like that. It has to be, it can't be a lesser workers' comp system that you choose than what the state currently offers. And so, that sounds pretty good to me, right? It gives you the opportunity to go out into the market and choose the right company that you want to use. The Oklahoma Supreme Court didn't see it that way. They said it created a special law. They said it creates an impermissible select group of employees that are in a private system versus a public system. They stretched that one. I'm going to tell you, the next one I talk about is even a little more absurd, candidly. Beeson versus I.E. Miller Services. It was a 2019 decision, so fairly new. There is in our state law, or was in our state law, a cap on non-economic damages. These are damages that you didn't necessarily, some states call them punitive damages. They're a form of punitive damages, essentially, that you didn't necessarily earn, but it's really more intended to punish the defendant for the wrong that they caused. So there was a cap on non-economic damages for people that survived their injury. California was the first one to have one of these back in the 70s, okay? So this isn't a new idea. This isn't a controversial idea. We do have in our state constitution, you cannot put a cap on damages in a wrongful death. So there is that. The Oklahoma Supreme Court said that non-economic damages cap creates a special class. Those that are living after their injury, and those that are dead after their injury. And so they got rid of the non-economic damages cap for those that survived their injury, saying, you know, there's really no difference between being alive and being dead. Go read the opinion. There's the name of the case right there. And that's in a very long-winded opinion. That's what they said. Again, two very, anonymous, no big deal cases, you might think, that have incredibly vast impact on the way that we do business in the state of Oklahoma. Just a couple more terms, because I, am a Federalist Society guy, and you hear these terms sometimes. So I just want to touch on textualism and originalism. These are foreign words to many of our justices on the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Let me back up. I can't be too critical of the Oklahoma Supreme Court because Governor Fallon, starting with Governor Fallon and continuing with Governor Stitt, these two governors have done an amazing job putting good judges on the bench, particularly Governor Stitt. We are beginning to finally place justices on the bench that we should be proud of, that are reading the law the way that it is supposed to be read. And it goes down to textualism and originalism. I can dive into these. Each one of these is probably each a couple-hour discussion. But at base on textualism, terms should be read for their plain meaning. So that's the first thing. Read the statute for what it says. If you can determine the plain meaning, go for it. Unless they create an absurdity. Now, if I pass a statute that says there shall be no cars in the park after 7 p.m., and you say you can't allow that ambulance in the park to pick up the injured child, that's an absurdity, right? I think we would all agree that would be an absurd result, that an ambulance can't go in to take care of a child after 7 p.m. That's the sort of thing that textualism involves, and even as recently as just 3 weeks ago, there was a case that I'm familiar with. You had to interpret a statute, and the Justice Alito at the U.S. Supreme Court questioned during his time, why can't we just say that just created an absurdity, and that answers the question? So it is a regularly discussed debate. An additional test to think about there is how would a reasonable person living at the time the law was adopted have understood the meaning to be. I have on there not strict construction, and the reason I have not strict construction is there's a lot of people out there that think that we as judicial conservatives look at these things as a strict construction thing. That would mean that we read it literally for what it is. We wouldn't allow that 7 p.m. exception for an emergency vehicle if that was the case. So I encourage you to think about not strict construction, but I encourage you to think about textualism. Originalism is something that can be used, I guess, across statute, but is really more focused on a constitutional analysis. And if the principle or belief that a text should be interpreted in a way consistent with how it would have been understood or was intended to be understood at the time it was written. So we look at things like the Federalist Papers when we're interpreting the U.S. Constitution. We look at the anti-federalist debates as well. Justice Scalia was very, very famous for having a vast dictionary library. And he would go back to dictionaries from the time to provide his interpretation of particular words that are in the Constitution. So those are the sort of things that really kind of go into these discussions and these debates. And if you ever hear a judge or a judicial nominee talk about, I am a textualist, I subscribe to originalism, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are, but it's on a good track. So even Justice Kagan once, in regard, after Justice Scalia passed away, said we are all textualists now. Now her form of textualism looks a lot like non-textualism to me, but it is what it is. Here's a couple other cases I wanted to talk about quickly on that you all need to be paying attention to that are going through the courts right now. In fact, they're both at the appellate level here in the Oklahoma Supreme Court. We all know that and they involve nuisance, right? Everybody knows that in your city, if you don't cut your grass, the city may try to come out and say you need to cut your grass. They may try to fine you. They can arguably call your land a nuisance. Municipalities, as an example on oil and gas, specifically in statute, municipalities can issue regulation against noise or odors or traffic or reasonable setbacks. So if you're violating those, they can issue an ordinance in the oil and gas sector. Well, then comes along Vulcan Construction Materials. It's an aggregate mine. It operates down in the southeastern part of the state. And they dared to have an aggregate mine 15 miles away from the city of Tishmingo. Tishmingo passed an ordinance and said, we think that aggregate mine creates a nuisance. Again, 15 miles away from the city limits. And the reason that they do this is, well, our water supply is close by and we don't want them to hurt our water supply. Now, nothing wrong with trying to protect your water supply, but using a nuisance theory, trying to expand the nuisance authority 15 miles beyond city limits is kind of a stretch. I have worked with the city of Stillwater, I was opposed to the city of Stillwater on the issue, but they were trying to regulate half mile outside of city limits. There's probably a little bit of room for them to do that, but it's not much. So if you magnify half a mile out to 15 miles, you really see what's going on here. The problem is the attorney behind the thing. Retired federal judge, and he was a federal judge that was appointed by Bill Clinton, Michael Burridge. He's the attorney for the city, and he's the one that's pushing this theory, trying to expand the nuisance authority. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Because it allows much more broad use of the nuisance authority so he can file more lawsuits and plaintiff's attorneys can bring more lawsuits in the state that we then all have to defend and deal with as our numerous costs rise because risk goes up. So that's the problem. Now there's another case that former Judge Burridge is working on. And it's the opioid lawsuit. And look, opioids have been a scourge on people. The abuse of opioids has been a scourge on people all across the country. The misuse of them is staggering. But Judge Burridge went to A.G. Hunter and said, got a great idea. Nuisance theory. Let's use this against somebody that looks like a really bad, evil company. And let's file a lawsuit against them. But guess what? And at the district court level, Judge Thad Balkman, Republican Judge Thad Balkman, said, you're right, nuisance theory. And issued an assessment against Johnson & Johnson. It's now in the Oklahoma Supreme Court. But the statement here, and I borrowed this from the brief of the Attorney General in the beginning, the state brought this case under the Attorney General's express statutory authority to institute equitable proceedings for the abatement of public nuisances that endanger public health and safety. That's a very, very scary statement. And I'm not just saying that here in Oklahoma. I'm not asking you about your opinion on opioids or whether they're good or bad or whatever. I respect that view. But this is the same exact sort of stuff that companies downtown, Devon, Continental Resources, other companies that provide good jobs, are being sued in San Francisco and Minnesota and Delaware. Why? Because oil and climate change create a nuisance, is the theory. And so if we expand that here in Oklahoma, it doesn't matter, I mean, it just matters who the AG is, and a nuisance lawsuit can be filed. So I think that it's really prime examples of things you need to pay attention to. They're going on right now. Last case that I have in here is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. I just raised this one because it was in the news this week. I'm sure you all heard that the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to take the latest abortion case, for review. Be heard probably in the fall. I'm going to guess October or November. Issue will probably be issued next June. So it's going to be a while before we hear anything. But that's kind of where we are. The Mississippi statute would prohibit, or does prohibit, nearly all abortions after 15 weeks. That was the decision of Mississippi to put that forward. I'm seeing in the press, many of the article writers are saying that this would undo Roe or overturn Roe. I don't think that I would quite go that far, and I think they're doing it for scare effect for their readers. But what does it do? So Roe recognized the third trimester. By the way, I don't know if you know any doctors or any pregnant women, but other than outside of Roe, I've never heard anybody say that I'm in my third trimester. I usually say I'm 32 or 34 weeks along or whatever. But the Supreme Court set up this trimester system, and at the time, 1973, they said that the third trimester is the date of viability, and that once the date of viability has been reached, it requires a compelling interest in protecting prenatal life. There's a significant regard or protection there by the courts that this should be granted. Well, the question is, has science advanced enough that the date of viability can actually be much earlier? And I think most of us in this room would at least suggest yes. I think science would say yes. I think the answer is yes. And so Dobbs wouldn't necessarily overturn Roe, I don't think, in my opinion. It depends on how the justices use it, right? The opinion, I suppose. But the more narrow, specific question that we have is whether that third trimester viability can actually be lowered back down. Based on the general accepted science I've seen out there, I think that it's about 24 weeks for viability. So I don't know that they go all the way down to Mississippi's statute of 15 weeks. But Mississippi doesn't need 15 weeks to win. They just need the court to move the third trimester viability date down to a lower date. I know I'm getting close on time, and I wanted to allow for a couple of questions. How do we pick judges? We let a bunch of attorneys from the Oklahoma Bar Association figure out how to do that. They send 3 names to the governor. The governor has to pick those 3 names. But I got to tell you, it's really, really hard to push on those people to get somebody good through to the governor. And so on the next slide, I talk about the federal system. You all know the federal system. Somebody's nominated by the governor or even by the president at the federal level, and the Senate reviews them and scrutinizes them and determines whether or not they would be a good judge. I argue this is the better system. I argue that this is the system that we need to look at here in Oklahoma, and I hope that you will, as efforts going forward on these issues, I hope you'll join me in pushing for that reform to a federal model here in Oklahoma. I ate up a lot of time just gathering, so we don't have a lot of time for questions, but let's.
Yeah, I think we're sort of out of time. You might ask later. I want to ask one thing.
Yeah.
To get to that new system, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous That is ridiculous the way we're doing it right now.
It is.
It's like asking a fox to present some candidates to guard the chicken house. So who would the fox want? I'm gonna use my cousin. So could you tell us how we get to that other system?
Can we get that last slide up too?
So because it is Article 7B, the Bar Association a few years ago, in the 60s, used the judicial scandal to create the opportunity for them to pass into effect this JNC. This is not a widely accepted thing around the country at the time. They snuck it in. And it's been the system we've operated under, and they'll always say, oh, there was a scandal, as their reason that we need to go to retain the system. Well, I disagree, but I think the federal system provides that. We do need to overturn Article 7B of the Constitution and create a new article to allow the federal style model to go into place. I don't want to talk a lot about it because there's just a lot of discussions going on. But I do believe over the next few years the opportunity to do this is going to be right, and we will try to move forward with it.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we're out of time.
Yeah. I'll hang around for a little bit.
So we're going to close, and next week we're back at our normal location, and we have James Taylor who's going to talk about critical race theory. James tells me he has a new presentation that has blown the socks off of some groups he's spoken to. It's different than anything he's ever given to us before, and so I'm looking forward to that. A number of you have asked me how the mayor, what's going on in Norman. You know, we spend money, a lot of time, a number of us knock doors. And so Russ Smith, who is heading that, is going to also be with us next week to talk to us about what's going on in the third largest city in Oklahoma, and our mayor and city council. And I've just been texting Star Parker. Do you all know who Star Parker is? Okay. Star Parker sent a little email out this morning. Nothing really new with Star. She's talking about critical race theory, so I just sent her a text. And I've talked to Star before about helping us with some of our inner city issues, and she told me she'd give me her time. She only wants air flight and hotel. She won't charge me any fees, so she really wants to help Oklahoma. But she's trying to work around her schedule to at least appear, if Kurt can work this out, through a Zoom meeting next week. And so hopefully Star Parker will be with us for a few minutes next week. And we'll be back at the COBA. So we're going to close, and I've asked Pastor Aaron Means, or Dr. Aaron Means, if he would close us in a word of prayer.
Let's pray. Father, we thank you and praise you, my Father, for your love towards us. We want to thank you, my God, for revealing to us more and more of the truth, your truth. Not someone else's truth, not false truth, but your truth. So, Father, we are praying for these judges at all the levels, my Lord, that their hearts, my God, will be inclined on what is your truth. We pray, my Father, by vision and signs and by testimony of your people in their lives, so they will face what is your will, what is your way, and what is righteous. Father, praying for their behalf that they will turn to your word, to your wisdom. Father, we ask that, my Father, that when they make decisions, they'll be based on your word, based on your truth, based, my Father, on your love and not their own. May the hands of the wicked one be broken off their line of authority. Father, we pray that their line of authority will come and be lined up with your word. May, my Father, the appointments of judges be according to your truth and nothing less. We thank you for your blessing. We thank you for your love. We thank you for continuing, my God, to give us strength and the power to fight for what is truth. We bless your holy and righteous name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.